Looking to take your financial knowledge to the next level? You're in the right place. Welcome to Ask Ralph, offering accounting, technical, and financial advice. Whether you're looking to save taxes or improve your business, he's got you covered. Here's your host of Ask Ralph, Ralph Eastup Jr.
Hello and welcome back to the Ask Ralph Show. If you listened to our previous broadcast, we talked about the Taxpayer's Advocate service, and that's a place where you can go to the IRS to get assistance if the normal channels aren't working. And one of the things they mentioned in there was the illustration of the Taxpayer's Bill of Rights. So I thought I would take a few minutes during today's show and talk about that. And each and every taxpayer has a set of fundamental rights that they should be aware of when dealing with the IRS. So let's take a few minutes and we'll talk about each of these items in the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. The first one is the right to be informed. Taxpayers have the right to know what they need to do to comply with the tax laws. They are entitled to clear explanations of the laws and IRS procedures in all tax forms, instructions, publications, notices, and correspondence. They have the right to be informed of IRS decisions about their tax accounts and to receive clear explanations of the outcomes. So there's an information point to this, that you need to be informed. Taxpayers have the right to quality service. Taxpayers have the right to receive prompt, courteous, and professional assistance in their dealings with the IRS, to be spoken to in a way that they can easily understand, to receive clear and easily understandable communications from the IRS, and to speak to a supervisor about inadequate service. So we talked about informed and now quality service. Now we can all talk about whether we feel like they're meeting that, but that is in their Taxpayer Bill of Rights. The next one is the right to pay no more than the correct amount of tax. Taxpayers have the right to pay only the amount of tax legally due, including interest and penalties, and to have the IRS apply all tax payments properly. So I like what this says, and it's that the taxpayer doesn't need to pay more than the correct amount. So the IRS has an obligation to make sure that they're treating you fairly and that you pay no more than the correct amount of tax. The next one, the right to challenge the IRS's position and be heard. Taxpayers have the right to raise objections and provide additional documentation in response to formal IRS actions or proposed actions, to expect that the IRS will consider their timely objections and documentation properly and promptly and fairly, and to receive a response if the IRS does not agree with their position. So this is your right to challenge. This is your right to appeal. This is your right to object. You know, whenever the IRS is going to do something, they're going to send you an assessment notice. They're going to say, here's what we think we're going to do. And that gives you the opportunity to challenge that and see if there's any efficacy in, challenging that position. That's your opportunity to be heard. The next one is the right to appeal an IRS decision in an independent forum. Taxpayers are entitled to a fair and impartial administrative appeal of most IRS decisions, including many penalties, and have the right to receive a written response regarding the Office of Appeals decisions. Taxpayers generally have the right to take their cases to court. So you've got this right to appeal. So if the IRS comes out with an assessment notice, let's say you object to it, you file, hey, I don't agree with that. You still have the right, if they come back with, a final assessment, to ask for an appeal. If that appeal fails, and you're going to be notified of that appeal, maybe a telephone appeal, but you're going to be able to engage with somebody in that. If that fails, then you do have the option of taking an issue to tax court. Not a lot of things hit that, but that's something you do have the opportunity to do. The next right, the right to finality. Taxpayers have the right to know the maximum amount of time they have to challenge the IRS position, as well as the maximum amount of time the IRS has to audit a particular tax year or collect a tax debt. Taxpayers have the right to know when the IRS has finished an audit. And this is something I feel like the IRS is really doing a better job as of lately. And they are really defining, what is the expected time limit for each of the things they're going to do. So, for example, let's say that you're one of the unlucky people that gets audited. You're going to have a sit-down meeting with the auditor, and they're going to talk about, these are the documents they need. And they're going to give you a time limit on getting those documents. But at the same time, they're going to give you an opportunity to look at, how long is it going to take them to come back to a decision. They're going to put that in writing. They're going to say to you, I will have, my final audit assessment by a certain date. So you have that right to finality so that there's no issues with, this thing's hanging over my head and I wonder, is it ever going to get resolved? So that's one of the things in the Taxpayer's Bill of Rights that I really respect, and that is there's a time frame here and there's a right to finality. The next one is the right to privacy. Taxpayers have the right to expect that any IRS inquiry, examination, or enforcement action will comply with the law and be no more intrusive than necessary, and will respect all due process rights, including search and seizure protections, and will provide, where applicable, a collection due process hearing. So this is another big right. You have the right to have your privacy protected, and that may be, in the way that they interact with you, maybe not leaving phone messages at your office or something like that, but you have that right to that due process. They want to treat you as if, you're a person that is of everybody's entitled to this. This is something you get. Now, the next one is the right to confidentiality. Taxpayers have the right to expect that any information they provide to the IRS will not be disclosed unless authorized by the taxpayer or by law. Taxpayers have the right to expect appropriate action will be taken against employees, return preparers, and others who wrongfully use or disclose taxpayer return information. I like this one as well. What they're saying to the taxpayers is, if you see that someone is using your information, you have the right to go to the IRS and say, listen, this needs to be resolved. And they're going to go after that with employees, return preparers, and others who wrongfully use or disclose your information. As a tax return accountant, there's certain disclosures we have to give the clients about confidentiality and privacy. The next one is the right to retain representation. Taxpayers have the right to retain an authorized representative of their choice to represent them in their dealings with the IRS. Taxpayers have the right to seek assistance from a low-income taxpayer clinic if they cannot afford representation. So, and I hear this from a lot of clients sometimes, the IRS sends you this notice and you don't realize you have the ability to find someone to help you. Well, and that's why they always send with a first notice this Taxpayer's Bill of Rights. So you can read in there that you have the right to representation. And I definitely recommend that you take advantage of that. And if you can't afford representation, then this low-income taxpayer clinic is really a great way to go. And finally, the last taxpayer right is the right to a fair and just tax system. Taxpayers have the right to expect the tax system to consider facts and circumstances that might affect their underlying liabilities, ability to pay, or ability to provide information timely. Taxpayers have the right to receive assistance from the Taxpayers Advocate Service if they are experiencing financial difficulty, or if the IRS has not resolved their tax issues properly and timely through its normal channels. So you're entitled to a just and fair tax system. In the trade, we would call that, fair administration of tax. Many times we have argued issues for clients where we simply made the case that this is not a fair administration of tax. And we've been able to be successful in those things. Now, it may involve us getting, the Taxpayers Advocate Service involved. It may involve us getting an appeal. But all of those things are within those Taxpayer Bill of Rights. So whenever you're interacting with the IRS, take some time and understand that you do have rights. Just because they send you a notice doesn't mean that you don't have the rights to due process. You definitely have the rights to understand what they're saying and understand the law behind it. So I hope this was helpful.
You've been listening to Ask Ralph, brought to you by Saggio Accounting Plus. Please subscribe to and rate our podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, and leave us a rating and review. Our podcast is produced by Carolyn Peters. Thank you for listening, and be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at Ask Ralph Media. You can also hear me each week on 1450 WILM and on 1410 WDOV in Delaware, and on the iHeartRadio app. Submit your questions or ideas for future shows by sending an email to AskRalph@AskRalph.com.
The information contained in this episode of Ask Ralph is based on data available as of the date of its release. Saggio Accounting Plus and Ask Ralph Media Inc. is under no obligation to update this content if changes occur. Applying this information to your specific situation requires careful consideration of all facts and circumstances, and any information provided is not to be considered as financial, tax, or legal advice. Please consult your tax advisor or attorney before acting on any material covered.